The mysterious SOS. The stars glimmered like distant diamonds in the vast emptiness of space. The Deathworlder fleet was patrolling a quiet sector, far from the bustling trade routes and crowded colonies. Their ships moved silently, a testament to human engineering. Each vessel was equipped for combat and survival, a necessity for those from a world known for its harsh conditions and resilient people. On board the flagship Resolute, Commander Jax was reviewing routine reports. The mission was straightforward: patrol the outer edges of known space, ensure no pirate activity, and return home in 2 weeks. Most of the crew considered it a dull assignment, but Jax knew better than to underestimate the unknown. "Commander," said Lieutenant Mira, her voice sharp and urgent. Jax looked up from his desk. "We've picked up an SOS signal." Jax frowned. "From where?" Mira hesitated, her fingers flying over the control panel. "That's the strange part, sir. It's coming from nowhere. There's no planet, no station, not even a debris field in that sector. It's just empty space." This caught Jax's attention. He stood and walked over to the central console. The signal was faint, barely registering on their systems, but it was unmistakably a distress call. The frequency was old, one that hadn't been used in decades. "Who still uses this frequency?" Jax asked, narrowing his eyes. "Not many, sir," Mira replied. "It was retired almost 50 years ago. But the message is looping. Someone sent it intentionally." The bridge grew quiet as the crew processed the situation. A retired frequency from an uncharted sector. It didn't make sense. "Patch it through," Jax ordered. A crackling sound filled the room, followed by a fragmented voice. "Mayday. Anyone hear us? Stranded. Need help. Please respond." The voice was human, desperate, and weak. Jax felt a chill run down his spine. Who was out there? And why were they using such an old signal? "Could be a trap," said Officer Lang, a grizzled veteran who rarely trusted anything unusual. "Pirates sometimes fake distress signals to lure in ships." Jax nodded. It was a valid concern. But something about the voice didn't feel like a trick. It sounded real, raw with fear. "Lieutenant, how far is the source?" "About 2 hours at full speed," Mira replied. Jax made his decision. "Set a course. We'll investigate." The crew exchanged uneasy glances but obeyed. The fleet adjusted its trajectory, heading toward the mysterious signal. As the ships moved through the black void, tension built on the Resolute's bridge. Jax kept his eyes on the view screen, scanning for any sign of danger. He knew the risks but couldn't ignore a distress call, especially one that sounded so genuine. 2 hours later, the fleet arrived at the coordinates. At first, there was nothing, just the endless expanse of space. Then, Mira gasped. "Commander, look." On the view screen, a massive derelict ship floated silently. Its hull was battered, scorched by what appeared to be weapons fire. The design was unmistakably human, but it was ancient, like something from a forgotten era. "That's impossible," Lang muttered. "That ship shouldn't be here. It looks like it's been adrift for decades." Jax leaned forward, his heart pounding. "Scan for life signs." "Scanning." Mira's fingers danced over the controls. "Sir, I'm picking up faint readings. Someone's alive in there." The bridge fell silent. Against all odds, there was a survivor. Jax straightened. "Prepare a boarding party. We're going in." Lang protested. "Commander, we don't know what's in there. It could still be a trap, or it could be someone who needs our help," Jax replied firmly. "We're Deathworlders. We don't leave our own behind." The boarding team assembled quickly, equipped with advanced suits and weapons. Jax led the team himself, unwilling to let his crew take a risk he wouldn't face. As they approached the derelict ship, the eerie silence was almost suffocating. The hull was riddled with holes, some large enough to suggest massive impacts. The ship looked more like a ghost than a vessel. The team entered through an airlock, their boots echoing on the metal floor. Inside, the ship was dark, the only light coming from their helmets. Broken panels and debris littered the corridors. "Stay sharp," Jack said, his voice calm but commanding. They moved deeper into the ship, following the faint life sign readings. The air was stale, filled with the faint smell of decay. Finally, they reached a sealed door. Mira hacked into the controls, and the door slid open with a groan. Inside was a small chamber, and at its center was a cryopod. The glass was foggy, but they could see a figure inside. A human, alive but barely. Jack stepped closer, wiping the frost from the glass. The figure's eyes flickered open, and for a moment they locked eyes. The survivor's lips moved, forming words that sent chills through the team. "You finally came," the survivor whispered, their voice weak but filled with relief. The mystery deepened. Who was this person? How long had they been waiting? And why did their voice carry a hint of urgency that felt like a warning? The journey into the unknown. The Deathworlder fleet drifted silently through the dark expanse, engines humming faintly as the stars stretched endlessly around them. The mysterious derelict ship now floated behind them, tethered to the fleet like a ghost clinging to the living. Commander Jack stood at the command bridge, staring at the holographic display that showed the decaying vessel in detail. It was ancient, too old to be anything recent. Yet the survivor they had found inside was alive, barely aged at all. Cryosleep explained part of it, but not everything. "Commander," Lieutenant Mira's voice cut through the silence, pulling Jack's attention. "The survivor's vitals are stabilizing. They're awake and coherent. I think it's time we got some answers." Jax gave a small nod, his eyes narrowing. "Let's hear what they have to say. Bring them to the medical bay." Minutes later, the survivor sat upright in the infirmary, wrapped in a dark gray thermal blanket. His face was pale, his hair longer than standard military cut. But his eyes, those told the story of someone who had seen things no one should. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of medical scanners. Jax approached, folding his arms behind his back. "You've got a lot of people curious," Jax began, his tone firm but calm. "We picked up your signal. If you hadn't been in that cryopod, you'd be long gone. Now I need to know, who are you, and how did your ship end up out there?" The survivor's eyes flicked to Jax, sharp and alert despite the exhaustion. "My name is Captain Elias Drake, and if I'm right, you've just put yourselves in more danger than you realize." Mira shifted nervously at those words, exchanging glances with Lang, who stood by the doorway. Jax's expression didn't change. "Explain." Elias exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting as if recalling something buried deep. "Our ship was part of a classified mission, something the higher-ups didn't want anyone to know about. We were sent to explore a sector beyond the mapped regions, a sector that wasn't supposed to exist." Lang scoffed, stepping forward. "Every inch of this galaxy's been charted. There are no hidden sectors." Elias's eyes locked onto Lang's, a faint smirk playing at his lips. "That's what we thought too, until we found one." The room grew colder. Jack stepped closer, lowering his voice. "What did you find?" Elias hesitated. "A planet, or at least what was left of one. We called it Solace 3. It wasn't on any star charts, and the gravitational readings didn't make sense. The planet shouldn't have been there, like a ghost of something that once existed. But that's not the strange part." He leaned forward, his voice dropping as if afraid someone might overhear. "There was a structure, old, ancient beyond comprehension. We believed it was alien, but nothing like we'd ever encountered. It emitted energy, raw and powerful. The kind of energy that could rewrite how we think about physics." Mira's brow furrowed. "Alien ruins aren't exactly new. We found relics before. What made this one different?" Elias met her gaze, his expression grim. "Because it wasn't abandoned." Silence fell over the room. Jax's eyes narrowed. "You're saying there were life forms?" Elias shook his head. not life. Something worse. Machines. They were dormant at first, buried under the surface. But when we tried to extract the core of that structure, they woke up. He rubbed his temples as if the memory pained him. They weren't just machines. They were designed for something. War. Lang muttered under his breath. Always war. Elias's gaze hardened. You think this is just another relic scavenger story? Those machines wiped out half our fleet before we could even send out an SOS. They chased us through slip space for weeks until finally, we made our last stand. Jax's voice was calm, but there was a flicker of unease. How did you survive? Elias leaned back against the medical cot, closing his eyes briefly. We didn't. I was the last one left. The others sacrificed themselves to ensure the ship made it far enough to send out the distress beacon. After that, I sealed myself in the cryopod, hoping someone would find me before the machines did. Mira looked at Jax, her voice hushed. Sir, what if they're still out there? Jax's jaw tightened. He had been hoping this was just another lost vessel story, an anomaly. But this sounded far worse. Before he could speak, the ship's alarms blared to life, red lights flashing across the bridge. Lang immediately checked his wrist scanner, his face paling. Commander, he barked. We've got incoming, multiple contacts, approaching fast. Jax turned to Elias. Tell me those machines can't track you through cryospace. Elias's expression told him everything he needed to know. They already have. The bridge erupted into activity as Jax raced to his post. Out in the void, faint shadows began to emerge, sleek, predatory shapes moving with deadly precision. The battle wasn't just coming. It had already begun. Boarding the ghost ship, the derelict ship loomed in the darkness like a silent titan, its shattered hull floating adrift in the black ocean of space. The Resolute hovered alongside it, casting long shadows over the twisted remains of the ancient vessel. Commander Jax stood at the airlock, helmet sealed, eyes fixed on the ship's scared exterior. His breath was steady, but the weight of the moment pressed down on him. This wasn't just another wreck. There was something about this ship that felt wrong. Behind him, Lieutenant Mira and Officer Lang double-checked their gear. The rest of the boarding party, 5 soldiers clad in exosuits, waited silently, gripping pulse rifles tightly. No one spoke, but the tension in the air was thick enough to cut through. Final checks complete, Mira announced, her voice crackling over comms. Seals are good. Weapons calibrated. Lang glanced at Jax. You sure about this, Commander? I've got a bad feeling about stepping into something that looks like it fought a war and lost. Jax's gaze didn't waver from the ghost ship. If there's even a chance someone needs help, we're not turning away. Lang sighed. Of course. Deathworlder code and all. A sharp hiss sounded as the airlock opened, connecting the 2 ships with a magnetic bridge. The boarding team crossed the threshold, boots echoing against cold steel. As they stepped inside, the light from their helmets cut through the pitch-black corridor of the ancient vessel. The ship's interior was a graveyard. Twisted beams jutted from the walls, wires hung like vines, and broken panels sparked faintly, their energy reserves long depleted. Every step forward kicked up small clouds of dust that floated weightlessly in the zero-gravity environment. Atmosphere's thin, Mira noted, running her scanner along the walls. Oxygen traces are minimal. No active life support. Lang swept his rifle across the corridor ahead. This place is dead. How did anyone survive in here? Jax's eyes narrowed. Let's find out. Into the belly of the ship. The deeper they ventured, the colder it became. Their footsteps faded into silence, replaced by the soft hum of machinery struggling to stay functional. Occasionally, the flicker of emergency lights would flash, just long enough to reveal twisted shapes and torn bulkheads. Mira's scanner beeped. I'm picking up faint life signs. Ahead. Cryopod chamber, I think. Jax signaled the team forward, stepping through a shattered doorway that led into a wide corridor. On the walls, old insignias marked the vessel as human military, though the designs were unfamiliar, outdated by at least 50 years. "This ship's from before the expansion wars," Lang murmured, running his hand along a rusted panel. "I thought everything from this era was scrapped." "That's the problem," Jax replied. "This ship shouldn't exist." They reached the cryopod chamber, a long room lined with glass tubes. Most were shattered, empty husks, their occupants either dead or long gone. Only one pod at the far end remained intact, covered in frost. Mira wiped the glass, revealing the pale face of the man inside. His breath was shallow, fogging up the interior. His eyes shifted beneath his lids, as if caught in a restless dream. Jax activated the control panel beside the pod. "Reviving now. Keep weapons ready." As the cryopod hissed and depressurized, Lang aimed his rifle at the glass. "If he turns out to be some kind of zombie, I'm shooting first and apologizing later." The frost faded, and the pod opened with a slow creak. The man inside, Captain Elias Drake, gasped for air, his eyes snapping open. He looked around wildly before locking eyes with Jax. "You finally came," Elias rasped, his voice weak but relieved. Jax knelt beside him. "You're safe now. Can you stand?" Elias nodded, though his movements were sluggish. Mira helped him to his feet, wrapping a thermal blanket around his shoulders. His gaze darted nervously around the chamber. Where are the others?" Elias asked. Lang glanced at the shattered pods. "There are no others." Elias's face darkened. "They didn't make it." The warning. As the team escorted Elias toward the airlock, the ship around them seemed to groan. Metal creaked, and distant echoes vibrated through the walls. Lang's grip on his rifle tightened. "Tell me that's just the hull settling." Elias shook his head slowly. "No, they know you're here." Jax stopped mid-step. "Who knows we're here?" Elias's gaze turned cold. "The machines. They're still on board, and they never stopped hunting." Before Jax could process his words, red lights flickered to life along the corridor, casting long shadows that twisted unnaturally across the walls. Mira's scanner beeped erratically. "Commander, movement, multiple contacts closing in fast." Lang swore under his breath. "Damn it, I knew this was a bad idea." Jax activated his comms. "All teams, prepare for extraction. Hostiles inbound." The corridor ahead erupted in sparks as dark shapes emerged from the far end. Sleek, insect-like machines skittered forward, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. "Open fire," Jax commanded. The boarding team unleashed a volley of plasma rounds, illuminating the corridor in bursts of blue and white. The machines darted with unnatural speed, dodging some shots while others crumpled under direct hits. Elias pulled a sidearm from the wall, firing alongside the others. "They won't stop until we destroy their core. It's buried deeper inside the ship." Jax gritted his teeth, already making the call. "Forget it. We're getting out of here." Lang and Mira provided cover fire as the team retreated back toward the airlock, the mechanical horrors closing in behind them. The ancient ship shuddered, as if resisting their escape. As they reached the bridge to the Resolute, Elias looked back at the derelict ship one last time, his expression grim. "This isn't over," he whispered. And somehow, Jax knew he was right. The survivor's story. The infirmary aboard the Resolute was dimly lit, save for the soft glow of monitors tracking Captain Elias Drake's vitals. Commander Jax stood by the viewport, arms crossed as he watched the derelict ship grow smaller in the distance. The fleet had withdrawn to a safe perimeter, but the unease that hung over the crew remained thick. Jax turned, eyes narrowing as Elias sat upright on the medical cot, his face pale but alert. This man was the key to everything. The machines, the ghost ship, the sector that shouldn't exist. Elias had answers Jax needed. "You're lucky we found you when we did," Jax began, his voice calm but firm. "But luck isn't enough. I need to know what happened out there." Elias's gaze drifted toward the ceiling, lost in thought. His fingers absent-mindedly traced the edge of his blanket. "It's hard to explain," he said softly, "because most of it doesn't make sense." "Start from the beginning," Jax urged, stepping closer. "You said your ship was part of a classified mission. Who authorized it?" Elias hesitated, his jaw tightening. "The Terran Expeditionary Division, or what was left of it. We were a Black Ops team, trained to operate outside charted space. They called it Operation Obsidian Rift. We were supposed to investigate strange gravitational disturbances in uncharted sectors. The data showed anomalies, planets where no stars should exist, signals in frequencies humanity never used." Mira, standing near the door, frowned. "I've read classified reports on the Rift program. It was shut down years ago. They said it was too dangerous to continue." Elias smirked, though there was little humor in his expression. "Officially, sure. Unofficially, they sent us deeper. We thought we were mapping dark space, until we found something that wasn't supposed to be there." Jax's eyes narrowed. "Solace 3, he guessed." Elias nodded slowly. "The ghost planet. That's what we called it at first. It appeared on our long-range scanners like a mirage, flickering in and out of existence. When we approached, it stabilized, a massive terrestrial world with no orbiting star. Imagine that. A planet, floating freely in the void." Lang leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "I don't believe in ghost stories." Elias glanced at him sharply. "Neither did we. Until we landed." Jax could see it in Elias's eyes. The memory, vivid and raw, replaying as if it had just happened. "The planet was barren," Elias continued. "Ruins covered the landscape, stretching for miles. The architecture was alien, but ancient, older than anything humanity had ever seen. Our sensors couldn't date it. Some of the structures were intact, others buried beneath layers of black stone that wasn't native to the planet. At the center of it all was the core." Jax's brow furrowed. "Core?" Elias's voice dropped. "A massive tower, half buried under the planet's crust. It wasn't just alien. It was alive, pulsating with energy. Our scans showed it emitted a gravitational field so powerful, it warped reality around it." Mira's eyes widened. "A Dyson core," she whispered. Lang shot her a look. "Dyson cores are theoretical. No one's ever found one." "Until we did," Elias said grimly. "We thought we'd hit the jackpot. A power source that could fuel entire systems, reshape planets. But the closer we got, the more we realized it wasn't abandoned. The machines beneath the surface." Elias's hands tightened into fists as he continued. "They were dormant at first, buried beneath the ruins. Machines unlike anything we'd encountered. Their design wasn't human, but predatory, sleek, efficient. When we breached the core's outer chamber, they woke up." Lang's expression darkened. "What kind of machines?" Elias met his gaze. "War machines, self-replicating, intelligent, and relentless. The core was their hive. We triggered their defense systems, and they began to tear through our team like paper." Mira stepped forward. "Why didn't you call for backup?" Elias let out a bitter laugh. "We did. The signal never got through. The machines jammed our communications the moment we entered orbit. The only thing we could do was run. We evacuated, but they followed us into space. Half our fleet didn't make it past the atmosphere." Jax's voice remained steady, but there was a growing knot in his stomach. "And the derelict ship?" Elias's expression hardened. "Our last stand. The survivors tried to lead the machines away from populated systems. We jumped from sector to sector, bleeding ships at every turn. When we couldn't run anymore, we fought. In the end, it was just me and a broken vessel. I sent out the SOS, sealed myself in cryo, and waited." Jax exhaled slowly, absorbing every word. "And now that we found you." Elias nodded grimly. They know you're here. They'll come for you, just like they did for us. The weight of Elias's words settled over the room like a lid blanket. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, Lang stepped forward, his voice low. So what's the plan, Commander? Jax met his gaze. We don't run. Lang arched a brow. You're seriously suggesting we stand and fight a horde of machines that wiped out an entire fleet? Jax's gaze flicked to Elias. We're not going to let what happened to his crew happen again. If those machines are still out there, we finish what they started. Elias's eyes burned with quiet determination. If you're willing to fight, I'll show you how to win. Mira glanced at the viewport, the derelict ship now barely a speck in the distance. Let's just hope we're not too late. Outside, the darkness of space stretched endlessly, but somewhere beyond the void, something watched. The ambush. The Resolute cruised through the cold silence of space, its engines humming softly against the black void. The derelict ship had been left behind, but the unease remained. Commander Jax stood at the center of the bridge, staring at the holographic star map projected before him. Captain Elias Drake's warning still echoed in his mind. They'll come for you, just like they did for us. Jax wasn't one to flinch at danger, but something about this felt different. Predatory. These weren't pirates or rogue mercenaries. The machines Elias spoke of. They were relentless, calculating, and patient. Mira's voice broke the silence. Long-range scans show clear space ahead, no signs of pursuit. Lang leaned back against his console, arms crossed. Maybe they didn't track us after all. We've been flying clean for hours. Elias, standing at the back of the bridge, shook his head. That's what they want you to think. His eyes were fixed on the display, his jaw tight. They don't attack immediately. They wait. Let the fear sink in. Jax narrowed his eyes. How long did it take for them to strike your fleet? Elias met his gaze. 3 days, just long enough for us to start feeling safe. Lang let out a breath, clearly unconvinced. You're telling me these machines can follow us through slip space without being detected? Not buying it. Before Elias could respond, the ship's proximity alarms blared to life. Red lights flashed across the bridge, casting long shadows on the walls. Contacts. Mira's voice sharpened as her hands flew over the controls. Multiple signatures appearing out of nowhere, dead ahead. Jax's grip tightened around the railing. On screen. Now, the view screen flickered, and what appeared made the bridge fall deathly silent. They had arrived. Sleek, angular ships drifted silently in the distance, their black hulls blending seamlessly with the void. They had no running lights, no visible markings, just cold, deadly precision. Lang cursed under his breath. How the hell did they get that close without us noticing? Elias stepped forward, his voice grim. Because they're not using standard propulsion. They phase in and out of real space. By the time your sensors pick them up, they're already within striking range. Jax's gaze hardened. He'd seen stealth technology before, but nothing like this. How many are we looking at? Mira's voice was tight. 6. No, 8 ships. They're circling us. Lang unslung his rifle instinctively, despite standing on the bridge. They're boxing us in. Jax didn't hesitate. Battle stations, shields to maximum. Prepare all weapons. The fleet behind Resolute shifted into formation, smaller ships aligning defensively. Crews scrambled to gunner positions, and turrets swiveled toward the approaching threat. But the enemy didn't fire. Not yet. Elias watched the screen intently. They're testing you. They want to see if you'll run. Jax's eyes narrowed. We don't run. A cold smile tugged at Elias's lips. Good. First contact. The lead enemy ship drifted closer. Unlike traditional vessels, its design was sleek and organic, as if molded rather than constructed. Pulsing blue lights flickered along its hull in rhythmic patterns, almost like breathing. Mira's scanner beeped erratically. Sir, I'm getting strange readings. They're scanning us. Lang's finger hovered over the weapon's control. One wrong move, and I light them up. Jax held up a hand. Hold fire, not until I give the order. For several tense seconds, nothing happened. Then, without warning, the lead machine ship fired. A single bolt of red plasma streaked through space, striking one of the fleet's outer defense ships. The vessel's shields flickered, then collapsed in a single pulse. Seconds later, it detonated, ripped apart in a flash of fire and debris. Direct hit, Mira shouted. We've lost the Vanguard. Lang slammed his fist on the console. That was a warning shot. Jax's voice was cold. Return fire. All ships engage at will. The space around them ignited as the Deathworlder fleet retaliated. Plasma rounds and railgun slugs streaked across the void, hammering the enemy vessels. But the machine ships moved like shadows, weaving effortlessly through the barrage. Lang growled as he watched the screens. They're too fast. Elias's voice cut through the chaos. You're not aiming for their ships, aim for their power nodes. They're not indestructible. You just have to know where to hit them. Mira's hands danced across her console. Targeting their nodes now. Locked on. The Resolute's main cannon powered up, energy thrumming through its core. A concentrated beam of plasma lanced through space, striking one of the enemy ship's dead center. The vessel shuddered violently, then imploded, fragments scattering in all directions. Lang let out a breath of disbelief. One down. Elias's eyes darkened. 7 to go. The cost of survival. The battle raged on, flashes of light tearing through the dark void. The Deathworlder fleet fought with brutal efficiency, but the machine ships weren't retreating. Every time one fell, 2 more seemed to take its place. Lang's voice crackled over comms. We can't hold this position much longer, Commander. We need to fall back. Jax's jaw clenched. He knew Lang was right. Mira, chart a course out of this system. Prepare for an emergency jump. Elias stepped forward. Jumping won't save you. They'll follow. Jax's gaze hardened. Then what do you suggest? Elias hesitated. We don't just run. We take the fight to them. There's a way to shut them down for good, but it's dangerous. Lang raised an eyebrow. Define dangerous. Elias met Jax's eyes. We go back to Solace 3. The core is the key. Destroy it. And the machines die with it. Jax stared at him for a long moment, the weight of the decision settling over him. Finally, he nodded. Set course for Solace 3. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. The final stand. The Resolute cut through the cold vacuum of space, engines burning hotter than they had in months. Behind it, the surviving Deathworlder ships followed in tight formation, trailing faint blue streaks across the star-speckled void. Ahead, a planet emerged from the darkness, a jagged sphere that barely reflected the light of distant stars. Solace 3. Commander Jax stood at the bridge, staring at the desolate world through the viewport. Even from orbit, the scars on the planet's surface were visible, deep trenches and blackened ruins, remnants of battles long forgotten. Lang shifted uncomfortably behind him. So this is the planet that wiped out your crew. Captain Elias Drake stepped forward, his eyes locked on the ruins below. It's not the planet, he said grimly. It's what's under it. Mira's fingers danced across the console, scanning the surface. I'm picking up unusual energy signatures beneath the southern hemisphere. It's faint, but whatever it is, it's massive. Elias nodded. That's the core. The machines won't stop until it's destroyed. Jax's eyes narrowed. Then we'll finish what your fleet started. But deep down, he knew this wasn't just another mission. This was war. Landing on Solace 3, the fleet descended through the atmosphere, cutting through thick layers of ash and storms that swirled over the surface. The Resolute landed first, its landing gears groaning against the blackened ground. The landscape stretched endlessly, barren and lifeless. Jagged spires of alien metal jutted from the surface like broken bones, remnants of an ancient civilization that had long since vanished. The boarding team disembarked, exosuits hissing as they stepped onto the ground. The atmosphere was thin, laced with trace toxins, not enough to kill, but enough to make breathing difficult without assistance. Lang scanned the horizon. Feels like we're walking into a graveyard. Elias adjusted his gear, his pulse rifle humming softly at his side. That's exactly what this place is. Mira's voice crackled over comms. I've mapped the core's location. It's buried beneath the largest ruin ahead. Looks like an ancient spire. There's a direct path through the eastern ridge. Jax nodded. Let's move. Stay sharp. Descent into darkness. The team navigated through crumbling ruins, the alien architecture towering ominously overhead. Strange carvings lined the walls, symbols and glyphs that flickered faintly with dying energy, like echoes of a forgotten language. Mira ran her hand over one of the carvings. These structures are humming. Whatever powered them is still active. After all this time, Elias's voice was low. That's the core's influence. The machines draw energy directly from it. It keeps them alive. Lang glanced over his shoulder, uneasy. Then let's shut it down before they wake up. The corridor eventually opened into a massive underground chamber. At its center stood the core. It was a towering, cylindrical structure, humming with raw energy. Pulsing red lights spiraled around its surface, casting long shadows across the chamber. Thick cables stretched from its base, burrowing deep into the ground. Jax's breath caught. This wasn't just a power source. It was a factory. Rows of sleek, dormant machines lined the chamber, thousands of them, standing silently, their heads bowed like soldiers awaiting orders. Lang muttered under his breath. That's too many. We can't fight all of them. Elias stepped forward, placing a hand on the core's surface. We won't have to. If we overload the core, it'll trigger a chain reaction, wipe out the machines and this entire facility. Mira hesitated. And how do we make sure we aren't standing here when that happens? Elias's eyes darkened. We don't. Jax's gaze hardened. There has to be another way. Elias shook his head. I spent years trying to find one. There isn't. Silence fell over the team as the weight of the decision settled over them. Lang finally spoke. We didn't come this far to back out now. Let's finish this. The machines awaken. As Elias began inputting commands into the core's control panel, the chamber trembled. The pulsing red lights intensified, and the rows of machines began to stir. Lang aimed his rifle. They're waking up. Jax raised his voice. Hold the line. Protect Elias until the core is overloaded. The machines lurched to life, their glowing eyes snapping open as they stepped from their platforms in perfect unison. Sleek, black figures with razor-sharp limbs and plasma cannons embedded in their arms. The first wave charge. Lang and Mira opened fire, plasma rounds tearing through the advancing machines. Sparks flew as the enemy crumpled under the assault, but more took their place, swarming like a relentless tide. Jax fired his pulse rifle, cutting down machines as they leaped from the shadows. How long, Elias? Elias's fingers flew across the controls. Almost there. Just keep them off me. A machine lunged toward Elias, claws raised to strike, only to be blown apart by a point-blank shot from Lang. Not today, you scrap heap, Lang growled. But the machines kept coming. Jax's heart pounded as he realized the truth. They weren't going to hold forever. The sacrifice. Elias's voice broke through the chaos. It's done. The core began to glow violently, shaking the chamber as the overload process initiated. Jax grabbed Elias by the arm. Time to go. Everyone, fall back to the surface. The team sprinted for the exit as the chamber collapsed behind them, molten metal and debris crashing down. Machines gave chase, but the tremors threw them off balance. By the time the team reached the surface, the core was already detonating below. A bright pulse of light erupted from beneath the planet, sending shockwaves across the horizon. The machines were gone. Jack stood at the edge of the landing site, watching as the ruins collapsed inward, swallowed by the planet itself. Elias stepped beside him, breathing heavily. It's over. Lang wiped sweat from his brow. Let's hope so. I don't want to come back to this place. As the Resolute lifted off, Jax couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in the galaxy, the machines were already rebuilding. And next time, they might not be so lucky. Victory and new threats. The Resolute drifted silently in high orbit over Solace 3, the scars of battle still etched across its hull. Below, the planet's surface was cracked and smoldering, faint plumes of black smoke rising from the ruins where the core once stood. The machines were gone, wiped out in the explosion that swallowed their hive. On the bridge, Commander Jack stared down at the planet through the viewport, his reflection faintly visible against the glass. The glow from the destruction below still flickered like distant lightning across the horizon. Lang leaned against the console beside him, arms crossed. We should be celebrating, Commander. Those things are gone. The fleet's intact. I'd say this counts as a win. Jax didn't respond immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the surface. Elias Drake stood at the far end of the bridge, watching quietly. His face was lined with exhaustion, but there was no relief in his expression. If anything, he looked more tense than before. Mira broke the silence, her voice soft. Scans confirm no remaining machine activity. Whatever was down there, it's been neutralized. Jax finally spoke, his voice calm but measured. You sound like you're waiting for something to happen, Captain Drake. Elias exhaled slowly, stepping closer. I am. Lang raised an eyebrow. What you think some of those machines survived that blast? That whole facility collapsed. There's nothing left but molten rock. Elias's gaze didn't waver. I've seen them survive worse. The bridge fell quiet. Jax turned away from the viewport and faced Elias directly. You're not convinced this is over? Elias shook his head. No, we shut down one hive. But the core, it wasn't just a factory. It was a signal relay. That's how they spread. Each core links to the others, sending data across entire systems. Destroying one doesn't stop the network. It just forces them to go quiet. Lang frowned. So you're saying there could be more of these things out there? There are, Elias said firmly. And now, they know who you are. The echoing signal. Mira's console beeped softly, interrupting the conversation. She frowned, leaning closer. Commander, I'm picking up something strange. Jack stepped forward. What is it? Mira's hands moved swiftly across the display. Residual energy signatures. They're faint, but consistent, like a repeating pulse. Elias's eyes narrowed. Put it through the speakers. The bridge filled with a low rhythmic thrum. The sound was distant, distorted, but unmistakably artificial. Lang's hand instinctively hovered over his sidearm. Tell me that's just leftover radiation. Mira shook her head slowly. It's not random. This is a pattern. Jax's expression darkened. A signal. Elias's face was grim. They're calling to something. Somewhere else. Jax's mind raced. If the machines were reaching out, that meant there were more cores, more hives hidden in the far corners of the galaxy. Destroying one might have triggered a larger response. Can we trace it? Jax asked. Mira hesitated. I'm not sure. The signal's bouncing off different points across subspace. It's fragmented. Try anyway, Jax ordered. Even if it's a faint lead, we need to know where it's going. Debrief and uncertainty. The bridge eventually quieted as Mira worked. Lang shifted restlessly, the earlier confidence in his voice now replaced with a more cautious tone. Lang finally broke the silence. Look, Commander, maybe we don't need to chase this. We did our job. The machines are gone from this sector. If they come back, we deal with them then. Elias's sharp gaze flicked to Lang. That's exactly what my crew said the first time we encountered them. We thought we'd won too. Lang shrugged. And now they're gone. No, Elias said, his voice cold. Now they're hiding. Waiting. Machines don't forget. They learn. Every time they survive, they come back stronger. Jax glanced between the two men. He could see the weight Elias carried, the quiet knowledge of someone who had fought this war before. I won't let this happen again, Jax said finally. His voice was low but resolute. If there are more hives out there, we'll find them. Elias's gaze softened, and he nodded. That's the only way to end this. An ominous discovery. Mira's console beeped again. She stiffened. Commander, I have something. Jax stepped closer. Show me. The holomap shifted, displaying a faint signal trail stretching across the system. At the far end of the path was a cluster of stars, uncharted space beyond known Terran boundaries. It's faint, but the signal is converging here, Mira said, pointing to a dark region marked only as Sector 12X. Elias's face hardened. That's where they're regrouping. Lang sighed. Of course it's in the middle of nowhere. Jack studied the map, the faint signal pulsing like a heartbeat. We're not letting this grow into something bigger, Jack said quietly. Lang, Mira, prep the fleet. We're heading into Sector 12X. Lang frowned. Are we seriously jumping blind into an uncharted sector? Could be walking into a bigger hive than before. That's the point, Jax replied. We're ending this before it spreads. Elias's expression darkened, but there was a flicker of approval in his eyes. Then I'm coming with you. Lang chuckled nervously. Oh good, just what I wanted. Another suicide mission. Jax's voice cut through the room. This isn't a suicide mission. Lang arched a brow. No. Jax's gaze was steady, unshaken. It's a hunt. Beyond the stars. The Resolute's engines roared to life as the fleet repositioned, drifting toward the outer edge of the system. Solace 3 faded into the background, swallowed by the void. In the distance, the faint signal continued its pulse, a whisper in the dark, guiding them toward unknown dangers. The machines were waiting. But this time, so was humanity.